The mountains of Ashenvale had not known silence in 400 years. That was how long Vera had ruled them. She was not merely a dragon. The word dragon was what lesser creatures called things that breathed fire, had wings, and ate livestock. Vera was something older, something that had watched civilizations rise from mud huts to stone towers and then crumble back into mud again. Her wingspan blocked out the sun over an area the size of a small nation. Her scales were the color of cooling magma, deep red fading to black at the edges. Each one was harder than the steel that foolish knights had occasionally brought against her. Her eyes were gold, not yellow, not amber, but the specific burnished gold of coins that had passed through 1,000 hands and remembered every one of them. She had killed armies. She had reduced kingdoms to the memory of kingdoms. She had been called, at various points in recorded history, the End of Swords, the Widowmaker of the Eastern March, she whose name empties fortresses, and, by one particularly unhinged bard who had clearly decided that dying young was romantic, the Beautiful Catastrophe. Vera had eaten that bard. She was not, in summary, a creature that experienced the world through the lens of surprise. And then there was Kai. Kai had arrived at the base of Ashenvale 6 months ago with a mule, a large pack, a notebook so full of writing that it had started growing extra pages out of desperation, and absolutely zero survival instinct, as far as Vera could determine. She had watched him from the ridge on the first day, certain he would turn back. Most humans had enough residual self-preservation to at least hesitate at the bones she kept arranged near the mountain's base. A simple, tasteful warning display. 7 skulls, some rib cages, and a femur the size of a log arranged vertically against a boulder like a signpost that read, "Here is where your ambitions should end." Kai had looked at the bone arrangement for a long moment. Then he had taken out his notebook and sketched it with annotations. He had set up camp 15 feet away from the femur. Vera had spent 3 days waiting for him to do something threatening. He had not. He had hiked. He had observed. He had left small portions of cooked meat near the ridge. Good quality. Actually seasoned with mountain herbs she could smell clearly from 800 feet up. Not a bribe. More like a courtesy. The same way a person might leave their shoes outside a door. An acknowledgement of someone else's space. She had eaten the meat on the 4th night after he was asleep. She had not announced this. He had noticed anyway. She knew because the next evening's portion was slightly larger and had been placed on a flat rock rather than the ground, with what appeared to be a small folded note beside it. She had unfolded the note with one talon, destroying it slightly, and read, "You're welcome. I'm Kai. I study dragons. I won't come up unless you indicate it's acceptable. K." Vera had stared at that note for an unreasonably long time. Unless you indicate it's acceptable. In 400 years, no human had ever asked. She had indicated. Not warmly. She had descended one morning while he was eating breakfast and stood 40 meters away, simply looking at him because that was technically an indication, and she was curious whether he would survive the experience. He had gone very still. The way small mammals went still when they understood, at some deep biological level, that something much larger than them was making a decision about their continued existence. Then he had set down his breakfast, opened his notebook to a fresh page, and said, without standing, "Good morning. You're larger than my estimates. I apologize for the inaccuracy." Vera had said nothing. "I can leave if you prefer," he had added. "I want to make it clear that I understand this is your mountain." She had stayed. Eventually, she had sat, which had startled him. Not with fear, she noted, but with the specific startlement of someone witnessing something they had genuinely not expected. His heart rate had spiked and then settled. She heard it clearly. She always heard hearts clearly. And that had been the beginning of something Vera had no existing category for. 6 months. He had learned her name from old texts and used it immediately and correctly, which had pleased her more than she intended to show. He had never lied to her. She could smell lies. And in 6 months, Kai had produced 0. Not even the small social lies that humans told each other constantly. The "I'm fine and it's no trouble" kind. When something hurt him, he said so. When he was afraid, he said that too, which was either extraordinary courage or extraordinary foolishness. And she had eventually concluded it was both simultaneously. He had asked her questions. Not the usual questions. How hot is your fire? How many have you killed? Are you truly immortal? But questions like, does the altitude affect how you experience temperature? Do you have a preferred direction for thermals? And once, very quietly, on a night when the stars were particularly clear, do you get lonely? She had not answered that one, but she had stayed. And then she had started watching more carefully because something about the way Kai existed near her had begun to produce an effect she couldn't quite name. She noticed it first in small things. The way he checked on her. Not with the obsessive, fearful checking of a person trying to confirm a predator's location, but the casual, habitual checking of someone who simply wanted to know if another being was all right. He would glance up from his writing. He would sometimes just say, "You still there?" to the ridge, knowing she could hear him from anywhere on the mountain. She always was. She had started noticing when he looked tired. She had, on one occasion, and she was not going to make a significant event of this in her own memory, repositioned herself near his camp on a cold night specifically because her body heat radiated, and he had run out of firewood. She had heard his temperature drop. She had told herself this was simply efficiency. Waste not. She had been lying to herself. Vera, who had not lied to anyone in 4 centuries, had been lying to herself about a human who had arrived at her mountain with a mule, a notebook, and the audacity to say good morning to an ancient predator. The other dragon came on a Tuesday. He was young, perhaps 60 years old, and aggressive in the way young male dragons often were. Too much fire. Not enough patience. Convinced that size was the same thing as authority. He came from the western range, drawn by some territorial impulse. And he found Kai first. Kai was at the base of the eastern ridge, sitting on his flat rock, eating lunch, and writing. He heard the wing beats and looked up. He had learned to identify Vera's wing beats by sound. These were wrong. A different rhythm. A different weight distribution. He stood, which was the correct response, and took 2 careful steps backward toward the rock face. The young dragon landed between Kai and the tree line. He drew breath. Vera came over the ridge so fast that the displacement of air knocked Kai off his feet. She did not breathe fire. She didn't need to. She landed directly between the young dragon and Kai. And she looked at the younger creature the way she had once looked at armies, with the particular expression of a being that had decided, calmly and completely, that whatever came next was not a question. The young dragon lasted 4 seconds of eye contact before he reconsidered every decision that had brought him to this mountain. He left. Vera did not watch him go. She was already turning, already looking at the space where Kai had been. He was still sitting in the dirt with pine needles in his hair and both hands raised in a gesture of "I'm fine." "I'm okay," he said. His heart was loud. "Vera, I'm okay." She stood over him. She was close enough that he was completely in her shadow. She looked at him with her ancient gold eyes and tried to locate the correct word for what was currently happening in her chest, which had never, in 400 years, behaved this way. "You frightened me," she said. Her voice was loud. It moved through the ground. Kai stared up at her. "I frightened you," he said. "Do not make it strange." He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached out, very slowly, with one hand, the way he had started doing 3 months ago, the gesture she had eventually stopped pulling away from, and rested his palm flat against the nearest edge of her jaw. Warm. He was always so impossibly, unreasonably warm for something so small. "Thank you," he said simply, the way he said everything. Vera closed her eyes. She had ruled these mountains for 400 years. She had been called the End of Swords. She had eaten a bard. She had never, not once in 4 centuries, had anyone look up at her from the dirt, with pine needles in their hair, and make her feel like something worth protecting. She stayed where she was. The shadow of her wings covered him completely. The mountains of Ashenvale had not known silence in 400 years. But on that Tuesday afternoon, they were very, very quiet. The specific quiet of something ancient deciding, without ceremony or announcement, that it had finally found something worth staying for.